Going YouTube live.
Am I shedding?
You're good.
Okay.
Now we are live. Live now, says Mr. Neal behind the curtain with Through a Therapist's Eyes. I have not gotten the episodes and the dates and everything together, but I'll do that for the regular show. Hello out there if you're finding us on YouTube for the first time. We do YouTube lives on Thursdays when we're actually recording the shows. So this is actually, let me see, 13th, right? July the 13th?
July
Yeah.
13th.
And we are on episode 240-something. That's a lot of episodes, man. Episode 236. So I happened to catch a cool article, guys, where we have like seemingly almost universal agreement in the United States of America, which doesn't happen on anything, right?
Any
Where
topics.
90% of us feel that we are in a mental health crisis. So I thought, you know what? We need to talk about that. So that's going to be our topic this evening. So glad you found us. Contact it through Therapist's Eyes is a good way to contact us if you don't do the express yourself on the YouTube chat, but we can interact with you there too. It's kind of a fun way to get behind the scenes with us as we're recording the shows for the regular podcast deal. We got Miss Victoria back with us over there.
Hi. Yeah, glad to be back. It's been a while.
It has. We've missed you.
About a month.
Missed you, dear.
I'm glad that I missed.
Welcome back.
And that is the illustrious Mr. John Pope with the voice of angels.
That's right, my dulcet tones.
The dulcet tones of angels. We have a new nickname for you.
What?
The dulcet
Oh,
tones of
dulcet
angels.
tone. Yes,
The Pope is still my favorite.
the Pope.
Indeed. So we are. Oh, I got to turn my volume down on all this. So we are ready to roll. I guess, kind of whenever you guys are. Neil, what are you thinking?
I'm good to
Okay,
go.
stop. Reset.
Sorry.
Cool. Well, let's do it when you go. Hello, this is Through a Therapist's Eyes on July the 13th with episode 236. I think it's going to be an interesting, massive current event topic with a amazing event that's happened in these United States of America where it seems like where we can't agree on anything, we have a 90% agreement, John, that we are in a mental health crisis. 90% of the United States citizenry, so it is said vis-a-vis a poll, that we are in a mental health crisis. Does that sound shocking?
It's understandable,
Yeah.
and yes, it is shocking in a sense.
We agree.
Yeah, we agree.
We agree.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, man, Miss Victoria is back with us. How are
Hey.
you, dear? Where have you been? We have missed you.
Well, I'm glad to be back. Scheduling conflicts.
Yeah.
But I'm
er-
back. Here I
Everybody
am.
healthy and well,
Yeah.
recovered, and
I have a 15-month-old, so,
scheduling
life is pretty
nightmares.
unpredictable.
Indeed.
And so, that kind of throws a wrench in some things sometimes. But, we roll with it.
So this is a panel of therapists where you get insights and thoughts directly through our eyes on everything mental health and substance abuse, knowing it's not delivery of therapy services in any way. Hit the subscribe button, click the bell for notifications. It really does help us. And guys, we need your help to kind of grow. Really, I don't think you as the listening audience understand or know how much of a big deal that is and how much an influence you make. So help us out really with the 5-star reviews. And we like to interact with you, contact it through a therapist's eyes. We really enjoy that. The human emotional experience, which we endeavor to figure out together. So, and a music note. The intro that you see there is from Reed Ferguson. Reed, shout out to you, brother. Go find him at reedferguson.com. He's an awesome musician. He'll come to your party. He'll come to your show. He'll give you a good time. Reed Ferguson, R-E-I-D. He's got a T in the middle of Reed Ferguson, FERGUSON.com. Check him out. So what do you think, man? Mixed Victoria, we've got, 90% of us, it seems like, are feeling this way. What do you guys really think about this? I mean, we've heard this, people talking about this, but I just got to really thinking about it when I was discovering what we want to do on the show. And I don't know. I let my mind wrestle around with it. I'm curious what you guys really take from it.
Well, I'm kind of thinking that. Well, I am thinking that that we have been in such a great turmoil of over the past throughout my lifetime that I know of.
Lifetime.
My lifetime, that I think it just ultimately everything just has come to a change, a shift, and our lives are very much more disrupted now than they were. There wasn't the computers. There wasn't all the I would say the pervasive technology that we have. Wonderful things that made our life better. Social media. I think that there has been a decline of people's religiosity or being able to, or worship or attending to church, for example, or synagogue or mosque, and people are not as dedicated as far as their faith is concerned. And so that's kind of lost. Marriage,
taking hits,
and not as many people are being married. Not having kids is another thing. There's been a decline in a sense of families. So,
which ground us.
Yeah.
Psychologically in a group.
Grounded us, yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes families have been very bad and pernicious in terms of having disruptive families or negative aspects in family. But right now, it's the good things aren't there either, and you don't get that sense of belonging or place. People move so many times.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, we want to get to a mentor moment before we really get our gears going with this show tonight. But John, that's awesome and cool, and I think your perspective of the long-term approach, I really value that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you started working before 95, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you're looking at a span of
it's over 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
And I value that greatly. So I think that I want to tap into that because that's the perspective that I have a little bit on, is this a quote unquote per se crisis or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So let's get to Miss Victoria. You have, I don't like that we were calling it a segment that we do, a mentor moment, because, and first of all, I want to compliment you for being willing to be on the podcast and have mentor moment where you have thoughts and things you're learning. I appreciate that because I just see so much of, we talk about, Victoria, things that I experienced and you bring them up and I'm like, oh, cool. Like I remember when, and like we have awesome conversations. So your willingness to share that with other therapists around the world and the listening public, I just want to praise. I think that's badass, and I appreciate you doing that.
A lot of times when you see me quiet here, it's because I'm just soaking up everything that you and John and when Casey was here that y'all were talking about, because I learned just as much. Well, on this podcast.
I learned.
We do, John. That's right. We really, the human emotional experience. We figured this out together. Is what and just. But I appreciate that you're able to bring those things though. So get us going. What's the mentor moment you approached me with this morning that we said we'd do live on air?
Well, and this is okay. So it's not that it's been a recent thing, just something that's come to mind and things that this is something that I have dealt with in past experiences with clients, but always, I'm here to get your insight on it. So how do you work with clients who are struggling to end a relationship with someone, whether that be a friendship, a romantic relationship, a breakup, a divorce, or whatever, and the other person is threatening to harm themselves if said person
right. Go ahead. John was just tapping it. We're both like already our minds are are moving with the many times,
But how do you work with someone to figure out a way to break that relationship or to end the contact when the other person is threatening or has the potential to harm themselves if that contact ends. Am I making sense?
You are.
I feel like I just walked in circles.
You
He hit me
are.
because I said
Oh, did he? Is
Yeah.
that what it was? Okay, sorry. Well, yeah. First of all, one of the things my mind does with that is, okay, look, like I have really kind of come to find, Victoria, and I'm curious if you guys agree or not, that when somebody is entering into a stance of breakup, that is the most decompensated state that people generally get to, like most commonly. And I guess what I mean by that is it just feels like whether you're in a middle schooler, we belittle the experience of puppy love and your first crush. Those are hard feelings when you're breaking up, and I don't think they're that different than when we're dealing with a 20-year marriage dissolving. I recognize there are differences, but my main point is people are struggling at their greatest most commonly at that very vulnerable time. Does that seem to be true in your all's experience? Curious. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So you quickly agree, John. Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful time. It's a hurt time, and so your question about having suicidal thoughts or gestures of your spouse, how do you continue to do or execute a decision to break up, right? John,
or
what
to just limit the contact, right? I mean, whether or
Set
not
boundaries
yeah, even if it's
to-
not just a divorce. I mean, it happens in friendships too, right? Best friends are no longer best
It
friends,
does,
and
yeah.
someone is like, oh, well, if you stop, and whether or not they necessarily don't verbalize, I'm gonna hurt myself if you stop talking to me,
But that's manipulation. There's a pathology there, and I'm thinking that that there's a sense. Let's say if it's a spouse or a partner that's going through this, is that that person feels that they have lost control in the relationship, that they may lose children, custody of children, and so that person is fragile. But that person is also someone.
And you're talking about the suicidal person.
The suicidal person, but the suicidal person's also can be manipulative, and so I would say that one would need to be very careful for the person, let's say the spouse or the partner that is leaving, and saying I can't do this anymore. We can't be in this relationship. There may be. But I can't be manipulated either. So you would, I think, seek to make sure that the spouse that you're breaking up with or leaving after 20, 25 years is going to be safe.
Right.
But you cannot.
It's number one.
But you cannot continue in a relationship where, let's say, there's.
And that's number two.
Number two, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. There's two real things, and you were leading right to them, John. One, of course, safety above all else is something that I've learned and heard, and that's something we do. So but so we have to take the self-harm statements and thoughts as absolutely legit. That's always the case, and if you have reason to believe of harm, you can always contact emergency room or this type of thing. But that isn't always the case with self-harm statements and passive suicidal ideation, because number two is also super uber important to realize. And I will say, hopefully this never needs to be said after, but I always tell people after the safety statements, secondly, you have got to understand that when someone completes the act of suicide, it is 100% of accountability and responsibility on that person and no one else. And I'll say that before an event, and I hope I never have to say this to the person after the event, and I will say that to them. So
Is
I
that
think
because
those
a
are
lot
two
of
real
people-
landing spots.
Is that because a lot of people take on that guilt of,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
did it because I stopped talking to them,
Oh,
or
yeah.
I ended the friendship, or I ended the relationship,
Any
or blah,
number
blah,
of
blah, blah, blah.
perceptions we can to get sucked into a
And-
really dysfunctional manipulation.
And that is enmeshment
Right.
extraordinaire.
Right.
And so you have to be able to, for this other person's mental health, that person needs to be able to be out of that relationship and start
Right.
anew and do some healing. And but unfortunately, when you're dealing with something where one of the partners is manipulating the situation, what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be two people that are absolutely miserable, and things are not going to the person
Or it
that
just continues the dysfunction.
dysfunction, yeah,
You know, it continues the dysfunction. I mean, I think on a clinical level as well, I'll do a mention as well, and then we'll get to our topics tonight. But I think you've got to be aware of assessments as well, Victoria. Right? Like I begin to think, what's the long-term patterns here? I'm always a long-term pattern.
You are, yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know, is there elements of codependency that I've missed? Are there elements of domestic violence that I've missed? Are there boundary setting issues that are just long-standing with
There you
family
go.
culture? Those are some things immediately
Okay.
come to my mind to assess in our individual relationship, so that you can continue making a reasonable decision on separation if that's where
Yeah.
you're at. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's something that we're not always taught in school, how to, deal with situations like that. And, because these people are coming to us, they're in our office because they're looking for an answer most of the time, because
And
they don't know what to do.
Right.
And
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and they don't want to feel that guilt of,
Responsibility.
if this person follows through with some sort of action, am I, feeling
Am I
that responsible?
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah. The
100%.
answer is always no.
100%.
But that doesn't mean that that guilt is not felt.
Yeah, it's sad
Yeah.
and it's scary and it's uncomfortable and you want to care, you want to have compassion,
Especially, as y'all said, if it's someone that's been in a 20, 25-year relationship and there's kids and, there's all these other connections that make it.
There's just a lot of weird feelings, though, clinically, like you're saying, John. There's when you're having a hard time, of course, we're all sad, but you can't be throwing, suicide at the person
Yeah.
who's leaving you. I mean, there's a great panic the person will go through. Let's, beg for the person to stay, and let's up the ante. And there's a lot of things that are going on. It's like, no, man, you can't be doing that.
You can't have a relationship like
No.
that. It
I
can't.
mean, what is that the way you're going to reestablish reconnection?
Yeah.
If you're no, that's not
Be
gonna work
miserable
well.
for the rest of your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Excuse
Okay.
me.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let's go to, this was a thing that I found, and the poll that was done was in partnership with Kaiser Family Foundation, which is an insurance-based kind of operation in tandem with or partnership with CNN, cable news network. There's polls that are done all around, and I would bet that you would find different places of polling, and they're going to find pretty similar numbers, because this has been being talked about since, COVID has kind of come around. But the idea was that 90% of the U.S. adults say that mental health is a crisis in the United States. And I suspect around the world, they're going to be finding very similar, realities if we did a
Except
deeper
if you're
dive.
from Finland,
Except if you're
Is
from
Finland the happiest?
the happiest place.
Have you been paid by Finns, John? What's going on here?
Yeah,
What's
I
going
have been.
They're giving you a serious kickback right now. Go
No.
visit Finland, says John Pope.
No, there was a study, I think, in the New England Journal of Medicine
Okay.
recently on
Yeah.
on that about Finland. They did a survey, and
Interesting, really?
yeah, And you would think because it was dark so often and
Yeah, it's
during
tough
the winter and
biological reality. Yeah.
all that.
I mean, if I could sleep a lot most of the day, I think I would be pretty happy too.
So in your readings, did you find validity there, or what did you?
Yeah, I think there's some validity there, but I think it's also the culture more than anything else is more amenable for people having a purpose and meaning in their lives.
Okay.
And
Well, that's a big statement.
and a family, and
I don't know that we're gonna have time to dive into it, but
No,
that's interesting.
that would be a different topic. We
Yeah.
could do the why Finns are so happy.
Okay.
So,
Maybe we'll pull that as a cultural client or a current event for you to chew us into that next week. But this said that Americans, some of the highlights of things that they found is that, the opioid epidemic was the first thing that really comes to people's minds, and the way that fentanyl has taken over and, just caused mass carnage. And I can tell you professionally and personally that it absolutely has. Big time. And then the teenager issues as a crisis level was another big highlight in area of focus that this researching was looking at. And then also severe mental illness specifically, and I presume to believe what I understand that to be would be more significant diagnostics, like we talked about last week with schizophrenia, and just a diagnostics show, which I hate that you missed, Victoria. I would have loved to have seen you go through that with us, but significant bipolar, and I guess onset of more serious forms of mental illness. Those were the highlights.
Okay.
Data from the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention showed that drug overdose deaths have reached record levels in 21. Okay, so I guess they're finding good numbers for that. Suicide rates were also back near record highs after 2 years, interestingly enough, of decline. But then also in 2020, mental health related visits to emergency rooms were jumping 31% among adolescents aged 12 to 17. So those were some facts that were cited. More than 1 in 5 adults describe their own mental health as only fair or poor. I mean, it's a pretty big number.
I believe it.
It's a pretty big number. Major sources of stress for a third or more of adults included finances. We have lots of questions with COVID, and currently fears about recession and all, and then current, and I can attest, political stress and political events. I've commented on the show anecdotally. Never had this come up in my clinical experience in therapy sessions. And it really was, and now is resurfacing, interestingly enough.
well, and also the climate crisis.
And,
that people are worried about. Some of my younger
increasing amounts of distress and fear.
distress. Yeah.
They cited 1 in 4 adults also identified personal relationships and work, respectively, as major sources of stress. Like, I could see that as well. And then lastly, a highlight from the article was really that one significant shift came this past summer with the transition where, we have the 3-digit dialing code 988, right? Which is very, very cool.
Yes, I love it.
With this transition of the Natural Suicide Prevention Lifeline to this code 988, which, if you don't know, is just like 911, but it is for mental health crises.
You can
mental
text
health
and
events.
call. Text and call.
Really? 988?
Yes.
Which you can't do with 911.
Which you cannot do with 911.
Oh, really?
No, you can't text 911.
I didn't know you could text 988
Yes,
either.
you can text. From what I've read,
on,
you can
I'm-
text and call it, which is the benefit of sometimes people are afraid to call, so you can text.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Thanks for that, Victoria. 45% increase in the first month. That's a lot.
Oh my goodness.
If that's
I'm telling you, having a
accurate.
3-digit number over a full telephone number that people have to remember to call if they're having crazy thoughts or any kind of suicidal, because it's a crisis and suicide hotline. So it's not just for people that are having self-harm or suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, good
And
point.
this
for
is the United States and Canada.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Is it Canada as well?
I think so.
I did not know that.
Okay.
I don't know. Can we look that up?
I
real quick?
guess look that
Neil,
up.
can you check that?
But it's 999 for Britain, I think.
So Britain has a system.
Well, I think that's their 911 system. But
That's different, though.
different though. Yeah.
This is specific for mental health, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
So around the world, I don't know if
maybe
you have
I'm wrong
anything,
about Canada.
but I can say in the States, 988 is very specific for mental health, and Victoria's teaching
I
us
say
that
if you
can
have one
text.
in your country, comment it on the video so that other people
Please do.
know.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. Neil, you got that yet? Okay, he's going to check if that's Canada or not, because I am curious. I mean, those are some real challenges. Those are some real realities, and I think that I can anecdotally confirm everything that I was seeing there. Has legitimacy.
I think it's interesting. You know, earlier you brought up, that teenage issues are a crisis. And
Yeah.
I just had a new kid the other day
Yeah.
who's 12.
Okay.
And they asked me, they're dealing with some, anxiety and depression and stuff like that. And they asked me, did I go through similar feelings when I was their
Okay.
age? And I thought that was so interesting because, okay, it is Canada as well.
So John looked it up. He
yeah.
beat you, Neil. So Canada is 988 as well as the United States. So that's cool.
But I think that just shows that it's full circle and that, someone who's 12 who,
Yeah.
I didn't get my first phone until I was 13 and I didn't have an iPhone until I was in college.
I had cans and a string.
Okay, Mom.
I had a cord that was really cool.
Yeah.
It was a special
Hey, I had one of those.
5-foot cord when we got the long cord. That was great. Yeah, it is cool, and it is full
Well,
circle.
I mean, I think that just shows that it's, I don't know. I think it's interesting that, that this person wanted to know,
yeah, it's cool when
if I
clients ask
had the
us, yeah.
same type of experiences or feelings when I was their age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what do you guys think? Let me center us in on, like, are we in a crisis? John, you were creating some cool thoughts about that. Victoria, what do you say? I mean,
I
do
say
you really
yes.
see crisis per se?
Yes. In my experience I worked in a Title I school, which for those of you who don't know, a Title I is typically a very low income, poverty, maybe borderline school.
Right.
Usually gets, free or reduced breakfast and lunch, things like that.
Kids are struggling.
Yeah. So after being a school-based therapist in one of those schools for 3 years,
Yeah.
and my experience in my internships and whatnot,
Over the last 5 years.
yeah. And I mean, I never had a normal full year in a school because I started in fall of 19
crazy.
at the school I was at, and I was only there for 6 months.
Right.
And then COVID hit, and our whole world's changed.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that before COVID hit, my caseload was 70 kids, which for a school-based therapist,
That's a lot.
I mean, they were about to bring in someone to come help me, like 1 or 2 days a week, because I had so many kids I couldn't see them every week. So I think based on numbers and stuff like that alone, I would say yeah.
It's anecdotal for you, but your observation of that Title I school, the children there, it kind of rang true, and so you're saying it's just generalizable to a greater population.
And especially once COVID hit.
Well, COVID's definitely going to be a part of this conversation for sure. Let's look interestingly at what really is a crisis when we look at that word. So Webster's a situation that has reached a critical phase or a turning point, marked by instability, danger, or urgency. Which we have instability, we have danger, and arguably we have urgency. A difficult or dangerous situation that needs immediate attention and resolution. And the key word there is immediate, right? The point in which a disease, if you will, is that a decisive change occurs, leading to recovery or death. So you see, crisis states. Common concepts in this basically are the idea of a critical turning point. That's where I think we hinge on, in my mind, where crisis states can actually be really cool in that regard. I mean, I really enjoyed doing the mobile crisis team work where I
Oh,
was
you
one of
did?
my first gigs. And I really enjoyed that because, like, I almost to the point that now as an experienced clinician, I wish I'd have, and I could create, I guess, the opportunity to go back because as an experienced clinician, I now see a market opportunity.
I was saying,
for
would you
major
approach
life
things
change.
differently?
Yes. Because that really can be a triggering point as you get to this critical state, this critical juncture in a transition mindset. So, and I was just green and new and didn't really, I think, fully understand that when I was doing that work. But, we love to use these dramaticized words, crisis. We love to use these, sort of clickbait things. And John, you say the age of anxiety, which I have thought about so much since you said that on this show. I funnel this to there, so I'm lending myself a little bit of sort of, oh, let's think about this for a minute. Are we really in a crisis? With this per se of what we're laying out here
Yeah.
for what a crisis really means.
I mean, I usually tell people that a crisis is different for everyone.
Okay, well,
So
that's
there's a
interesting. Go with that. Yeah.
I mean, what might be a crisis for you may not be a crisis for me.
It's interesting
And
true.
so sometimes that when I did my internship, I focused, in our assessment, we had questions about crisis or whatever. And I would get that question a lot. Well, what is a crisis?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, sometimes it's different for everybody. It's, I define it a lot of times as where you feel like you lose that control and things around you. I don't know.
What's a component?
Yeah. And so, I mean, my cat dying might be a crisis for me, but
Well, I can
for
tell you when I
somebody
answered
else, it
when I
might-
answered the phone call on the crisis line, I did not know at all what kind of topic I was going to be dealing with.
right, yeah, you could literally
idea.
get anything.
It's pretty varied.
And it sometimes would, and I'm sure there would probably be times where someone said something to you, like, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what's happening. And probably in your head, you're thinking, well, that's not really a big deal. Or like,
Sometimes
to
I
me,
might.
that's not, at least in my brain, that's not a big deal, or I would consider that a crisis.
But I think I recognized exactly like you're saying, and I think most clinicians realize, like,
Well, yeah,
it's,
and that's
it's
not-
what is the current experience.
Yeah. And it's not saying that what people are not are experiencing is not valid. That's not what I'm saying. But
into context, John, of 40 years, what is the macro level? Macro is just a fancy word saying, like, big picture, zooming out and seeing the big landscape here really around the world, particularly in the era of now post-COVID. What is our human experience in way of mental health crisis?
I sense that, and maybe this is part of my own experience as well, because you were talking about, well, what is a crisis? You can look at it in the big picture. Mm-hmm. The big picture would be where people have to make a decision that is something that one might consider life or death, or one would make a decision of urgency and cultural urgency, or civil. Or in terms of civilization urgency, let's say Western civilization, and the urgency is: are people having a sense of belonging? Do they have a sense of themselves? Is it positive? Are people know who they are in the sense that
You're going existential.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
but that's what I've seen, is that people have lost their identities and themselves, and so they've sought it in terms of you could see this with young people. There's a delayed adolescence of people growing up. Back in the day of my parents or my grandparents, you were 16, 17, 18 years old, you were a fully adult and you bought houses, you got married and all of that. People are getting married later and later, and they're living together. They begin having relationships before they know who they are in terms of sexual liaisons, before they know who this person is that they're going to be living with. They start having children.
So you're speaking a lot of the different specifics in the acceleration of human
accelerated.
change.
Yeah, change has accelerated so much, and the civilization has changed, and it's lost its moorings. So I guess I'm an old fuddy-duddy because I sense that we don't go back to the bad old days, but we are what we are presenting and giving our fellow people is something that's not any better. It seems that they don't know where they belong. They don't know who they are. They have no sense of identity.
I get concerned about, sort of doomsdayers and over dramatizing, the realities that we're facing. That's why I push back a little bit at this notion of crisis, because these words mean something to me. I mean, they're really important in considering mental health realities, and so it's funny. I was talking to our front end person about this a little bit ago, DW, and I mean, I was like telling her, like, you're gonna be precariously dangerous of getting on the show here tonight, because she was like, I mean, she's citing all these things like, boom, what do you mean we're not in a crisis if we're talking about guns? What do you mean if we're not in a crisis if we're talking about these kids that are doing what they're doing? What do you mean, Chris?
That's why DW was arguing.
Yeah. She was like, and she was hitting these issues.
Oh, I heard. Yeah, I heard her.
Right, you heard that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's undeniable, isn't it? To a certain extent. And I just wonder how much we're finally having a turning point, which would denote crisis, of getting the attention due for the level of issue that mental health has always been.
Right.
Yeah, right?
Okay. Well, I think in terms of the doomsday and all that, I think one of the things, we can't just put our head in the sand like an ostrich and just hope that it would go away.
Right.
We have to,
which is what we used to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would shut people away, or we wouldn't talk about somebody killing themselves or completing suicide.
Jump in to emphasize that, John, that we still have that nowadays. I was literally doing a show before this, and I was talking to Todd. Man, I hope you check his show out, man, because we had a great conversation.
I was looking for Todd.
And here he goes.
Hey, Todd.
If he walked through that door, I'd be pretty freaked out, because he's a growth and scaling podcast, a growth and scaling podcast for business. It was really cool. But I mentioned, just in introducing myself, that this will not defeat me after sexual abuse program that we just kicked off. And he's like, "Whoa, that's dark. Like, I didn't want to mention that or talk about that." Like, it just shook him, surprised him, because it was, we're in a business podcast, which I have interests in that as well. We still avoid the topic, is my point.
Yeah.
And we could find ways of avoiding
those
topics.
It's just
uncomfortable.
It's just like mental health has always been there. It's just now recently
getting seen.
There is more access to it. There's more resources to say, hey, if you're feeling this way, there is help for you.
Our
and
eyes
so
are
people
opening.
Don't feel the need to bury it, put our heads in the sand as often, because now, like we were talking about earlier, you have things like BetterHelp. You have things like other online therapy things. I can't think of their names right now. But I mean, just cerebral. The access to them is just greater. And there is that more acceptance of, okay, it's okay to say, I struggle with anxiety. It's okay to say, I mean, half the people I know, almost all the people I know are taking some type of antidepressant or anti-anxiety
all
medication.
The people she knows.
Or like, I mean, you don't really meet a lot of people nowadays who don't.
Well, that
might be my generation.
I have some clients that absolutely refuse to take antidepressants.
Oh yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
so I'm conservative
So,
about it, but
Yeah. So, no, but I would agree with you. There's so much more than 40 years ago. I mean, the medications 40 years ago were so they give you a chemical straitjacket.
I mean, they used
Oh,
to do.
so-
They used
yeah.
to
Yeah, but
poke a hole
Not
in your
adequate.
head and
but
drain the
no,
blood.
right. But I think that was the other thing, and that is that there's a paradigm shift, I think, going on in our civilization, our culture. And that may be part of the sense of people feeling like they're lost. I see the crisis, by the way, crisis and critical are same root words, basically, from the Greek.
fair enough.
And so you were using a word to define, like Webster's was actually using a word that
Define itself.
to define itself. But the point is that what you do with it. So in other words, maybe the crisis has always been there, or it's not as bad as we thought, but it's what you do with it now.
And that's interesting that you land there, because I was listening to you, Victoria.
Yeah.
And part of us figuring it out together, right, is what do we do about it now? Is it so that our eyes are opening and our awareness is increasing at the same time, Victoria, that you're a younger person recognizing that people are engaging more and there's more to engage. However, can we say, John, in the big picture, that our awarenesses are increasing so fast and there's so much going on, and the level of increase in availability of therapists, programs, community mental health centers, which we talked about last week with schizophrenia, is not increasing on the
Oh,
same
I would
rate?
agree with that.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
100%.
There's a great disparity.
And there's the crisis.
And there's the crisis.
I mean,
Yeah, because I remember not too long ago a current event that bothered me, and I'm going to say it again, because the
was?
current event that bothered me, where I had a personal friend that had their teenager in a facility needing an inpatient stay,
yeah.
and there was none.
no beds. Yeah.
The closest was Las Vegas. Yo, we're in Charlotte. That's the entire length of the United States, basically.
Yeah.
Okay? That's completely not okay.
I mean, do you know how many people I've talked to since I've been here, which is a full year now.
Congratulations.
But
We need to party.
yeah. Dang it. You can have me say. Anyways.
We're getting on her for
Yeah.
saying, if that's what you're wondering
Yeah.
what's going on.
And so I forgot what I was gonna say.
Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. I said the crisis was there's no beds, no placements.
Oh,
Yeah.
the amount of people that I've talked to since I've been here that say it took me 3 months to find someone that had availability
Right.
this week, or
Right.
this is I've been trying for 3 months to
Hear it all the time.
around the Gaston County or Charlotte or wherever, trying to find an opening, and you were the first person that had an opening, so I just took it.
Yeah.
And that's just so
Not
incredible.
because we're not fantastic.
Yeah, not
We are.
because we're not lovable, fantastic therapists.
Well, it was probably
But
a
no, but
cancellation that
yeah.
popped open this last
Yeah.
hour.
Yeah.
You have a cancellation, it feels like
I mean,
that.
Chris, I look at your schedule sometimes, and it's
It sucks.
full. It's full.
Yeah.
I mean, there are no openings.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just there are great challenges, and I think that's honestly a little bit of new insight in the moment. I'm not going to lie. The level of awareness is increasing on something that has been super high for a long time, and our level of services has increased, but the disparity is great.
That gap is still
The
pretty big.
gap is growing.
Which is insane to me
yeah.
because so many people are in. We pump out all these therapists, and then yet it still seems.
I would be. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's just it's hard for me to grasp that.
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
I've taught for better part of 15 years.
Yeah.
And
Higher education.
higher education, clinical mental health counselors, programs, did the accreditation programs and all of that during those years. We cannot possibly train our clinicians adequately with enough information. We do that in two
I can't
and a half
imagine that
years.
challenge. Yeah.
But how many people burn out that are therapists. I would say
Yeah.
a third to a half. And now that's just anecdotal. That's just observation.
No, I believe it.
I think there'd be
mean,
some interesting study behind that,
burnout,
John, because the
yeah.
burnout is a real factor. We call it compassion fatigue nowadays, but is a real factor in therapists and what we did, which you and I, having done what we've done for as long as we've done, I think is a testimony of strength and wellness on our part and your
Well,
part.
that's balance.
It's
Seeking,
right.
always
Yeah.
seeking balance.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes
'cause
that
that's
has
hard.
to.
Yeah.
I've seen people as a founder of two companies, they do kind of come and go, and there's a great struggle with that. Retention is,
And I
the
think
issue.
sometimes that has to do with the area of therapy that you're in. I know, Chris, you
Can.
and I recently were having a conversation about school-based therapists, which is what I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I don't have a statistic per se for that, I would bet you that the burnout compassion fatigue rate is quite high.
Same for the Department of Social Services.
Yeah,
Or
and
CPS in
which
the
is why
States.
they're always turning out. Which seems like
High
there's always a
turnover.
new caseworker because the person before them
Yeah.
quit or burnt out. And
Well, I would agree with that very much. Having worked in these areas for many years, is that it's not unusual. You might have a caseworker for 6 months, 3 months, a year, at the most, couple of years, and then that person leaves, moves on.
So
At the
even though we're
Veterans Admi-
pumping out
yeah.
all these therapists, it doesn't quite mean that it's enough and that they're staying long enough to catch up with that gap that we're talking about.
And,
Right.
and they also don't get the therapist or the counselors or psychologists don't also get enough continuity of training at that time, and so they'll go and they'll change where they're going, where they're working, but they've not been able to develop the wisdom and the experience.
At least in
to
the
another
States, it's honestly very comparable. It occurs to me talking with us right now with what we see in the States with police force. It's very comparable. You don't get very many new recruits. I mean, who would want to go into a police office right now and kind of become a police officer?
And not me.
Right? Heck no, man.
I'll stay right here.
But the need is greater and the recruitment is smaller and the burnout rates are high, and we
Same
see
Exactly.
thing.
that
I mean,
with
I think we see that with
therapists.
teachers right now.
Well,
and-
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think.
Working with people. How about that?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Human services, social
Working with
services
people in
type
policing,
thing.
in teaching, in therapy, yeah.
In the Veterans Administration, there's a high turnover. Excuse me,
Yeah.
turnover of psychologists, mental health workers
In the VA?
In the VA,
Because I know you're
MSWs.
tapped into that
Yeah,
system.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, these are all real.
Things like that don't surprise me.
Yeah, they're real. I think, and we see it. We feel it, I think, happening. I mean, if we look at anxiety specifically, we talked about the age of anxiety and specifically thinking about depression. And one of the things that hasn't really entered into our conversation a whole lot right yet is substances. Now, this is a good example of where I've been passionate about since I was in grad school or undergrad with the substance abuse issue. That is not new. Yeah, I mean, this has been in the 90s. We really learned about it in the 60s and 70s and paid high awareness of homage that's been going on since the turn of the century with addiction with alcohol, particularly since we learned how to distill alcohol. The last 100 years, this has just exploded, and we see things like sexual addictions now just going crazy with technology and the internet and the onset of the opioid realities. Like,
War
how about
on
substance
drugs
abuse?
and all that stuff. Yeah.
The substance abuse reality is a big part of this. Is that increased? 10% of our society generally has addiction. 10 to 15%. We know that's been
Just any addiction.
Pretty-
any addiction.
pretty solid for a long, long time.
Okay.
But the people that are getting involved in abuse of substances probably, has exponentially
Tremendous.
increased.
I would.
I'm defensive of addiction, but
abuse.
tremendous increases in abuse. And the realities of
Misuse,
increased potency.
abuse, yeah.
Misuse,
Yeah.
abuse, yeah. And the potency with fentanyl is just absolutely on a rampage.
And crazy.
And so people end up experimenting. And back in the day when there were hippies. The drugs were limited. You had LSD, you had the Mother's Little Helpers and that sort of thing. But
What is
and
Mother's Little Helpers?
it's like Quaaludes and
Oh.
Valium.
I didn't know.
It's a good Rolling Stone song.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
So you get all those, and but that has it's just burgeoned in terms of all the different substances that one can use now and have at disposal. Marijuana itself has become so much more potent in the last 50 years. And so
Oh my gosh, I could guarantee
the
you
old
that.
Cheech and Chong
7, 10,
movies
12% with that day. Now it's 90% THC content in weed.
right.
90. I can't even understand that, honestly. I really don't. That's insane. I feel
No.
like
I was just thinking that there's sometimes a lot of paranoia with some of my clients that are having to deal with that they smoke quite a bit.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they use quite a bit, and
It's
they are experiencing some side effects, very negative side effects.
hugely so.
Yeah, increased anxiety. It does just the opposite.
You know,
And
I
so-
think there are factors like politics, world unrest, local unrest with, recently Black Lives Matter and the January 6th attack on the Capitol and various unrest realities with social change and information technology. You hear a lot of issues with gun control and questions around the states and around the world, crime, realities, homelessness realities. I mean, these are some of the exponentially increasing realities that are kind of coming at us with discrimination and climate. Somebody, I think,
You said
you
climate change.
mentioned climate, John. I mean, these are
Greta Thunberg.
huh?
Greta Thunberg.
Who's Greta Thunberg?
She's a climate activist.
Sorry.
She's a little Swedish
All right.
young woman.
I
Yeah.
live under a rock. I'm sorry.
Apparently.
Hi,
We love
Greta. I'm
Greta.
sorry that I didn't get your
We
content
love her.
creation. We do?
We love her.
Okay. No.
Yes, we
some,
do.
Some don't. Some do.
We as in me.
We as a me.
We as in
yeah, it
me.
sounds like you're kind of speaking for
Well,
yourself right now.
And I think in terms of, I think one of the areas that have changed so much is you see a lot more of the unhoused and homelessness than one used to. There used to be sections of cities that would be called Skid Row.
Yeah.
In
Right.
the Tenderloin section in San Francisco, for example. But now it's dispersed throughout all areas. I don't know if there's more of it or proportionally, but they seem to, they're not hidden away as much or gelled.
Yeah.
And so that causes distress, I think, in some people because they don't want to be reminded that people are homeless.
I think there's a lot of cultural realities of shame and despair and avoidance
And
of
fear.
these issues because largely of fear.
And then with Penny, Daniel Penny, was that his name? He actually, well, the person that he was restraining died. He was a Michael Jackson impersonator, and he was homeless and making threats, and he restrained them. And
Oh,
actually,
yeah. I know what you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
And I can't think of the name of the.
I don't get the name either. It was a recent
just recent,
event,
and
current
so-
event. Yeah. Yeah, listen, there's systemic things that we were talking about that I think are I'm glad has already come up in our conversation, but we can't neglect to really mention the healthcare systems around the world.
Or lack of healthcare system.
In some regards, there's really strengths that some nations have about their healthcare system, and there are some weaknesses that are had about the healthcare system. But the systems involved are the access points, oftentimes, to mental health care, and that needs a lot of scrutiny because there's a lot of issues there, as you said. I hear that all the time, Victoria. You know how long it took me to find you? And I'm like, oh, how long did it take you to find me? Because they're like, dude, I couldn't find anything. And that blows my brain away and breaks my heart.
Well, I'm also thinking in terms of cost people. Because I don't know of a lot of places that do sliding scales so much. And,
Not anymore.
Yeah, and then
not
you
anymore.
have
My old job did
you're
it.
in the wrong network.
Yeah, well,
And if
yeah.
you're not in the same network, and so
There's so many barriers.
and so rates have gone
So
up,
many barriers.
and yet it's also controlled. Do you have EAP, employee assistance programs? But what do you get? You get 2, 4, or 6.
I feel like standard right now is 3.
Is 3, and you have to justify that.
You have to fight for it.
Fight
and they
for
don't
it.
pay well.
No, they don't.
On the
So-
clinician side,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's resources, there's systemic realities that we're faced. And I think that we have some decisions to make, which does lend to, yes, we're in a crisis because there needs to be, at least people might say, a turning point.
And
This
the-
can't continue.
The
It's not
people
sustainable.
that can't afford psychotherapy, mental health, counseling, or psychiatric help
Also-
cannot go ahead.
Because we know it works.
It works, and yet they can't have access to it.
Right.
I mean,
I-
think about earlier I mentioned that I had someone with a bill like over $500. Like, some people that's okay, no big deal. They put it on their HSA or they, whatever, if their flex card. But like a majority of people can't just
Pop
give
off
me
five.
their credit card and say, okay, charge $500 on my credit card. Like,
Half a house payment.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a car
when
payment,
you're in a
like-
crisis state and when you're in a mental health
And you're not making
reality,
good
it's-
decisions.
yeah, right, and causing compound issues to build up on themselves. It would be nice to be able to have a system of insurance or a system of care, where availability is kind of provided for when you need it. Because when you don't need it, you don't need it. But when you need it, boy, you really need it. Let me say that again. Because when you don't really need it, it's like you can get by and manage things. But when you really need it, you really need it.
Yeah.
It's hitting you right now because of your divorce, or it's hitting you right now because you found your son.
Well,
passed
that's
out
the
on
existential
drugs.
reality.
Those are the
right?
realities that we
Yeah.
see day in and day out, though, don't we? In what we do.
Can I ask you a question?
So,
And John, this kind of goes to you. Y'all don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But do y'all ever struggle with the money aspect sometimes when you meet someone who is in desperate need of help?
that'd be a next mentor moment, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're
a
not
whole
going to
nother
talk about that
topic that-
tonight.
yeah.
Okay.
I
Save
would-
that one for a
Okay.
mentor moment.
It tears me apart.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to save it. We'll talk about it more another time.
Yeah, we'll do a mentor moment on that
Okay.
one, because I want to get to the what do we do then? So how are we responding to this? What can we offer? What are some of the answers and the thoughts that we have about kind of where do we go with this innovative change in what it is that we're trying to do to broaden or weaken the gap between the needs and the increased awareness? I mean, I think of. And I think it came in the article, or maybe it was my own thoughts. I'm not sure, but we're not all cardiologists, but most of us know a lot of something about CPR,
Yeah.
right? Though we don't know deep details about the heart and
But you
and
know what you-
arrhythmias and
Yeah.
stuff, right? But we know CPR. So what is the mental health CPR kind of components? Where is our awareness is beginning to increase, and what can we highlight for people about like basic mental health CPR? Does that make sense? Does it come to your minds at all
Yeah.
about?
988 is
988,
first
okay.
thing,
Well,
first
there you
thing
go.
that came to my mind.
Yeah, that's awesome.
With
That's
the fact
awesome.
again that it's not just a suicide hotline, it is a crisis and suicide hotline.
Yeah,
So a lot of times when I have someone, I meet with someone, I give them that number. Like, if this is after hours and you can't get in contact with me, call
that
this
is an
number.
awesome shift. It really is.
Text
isn't
this
it?
number. Call this number. When we do a safety plan, I make sure that for someone,
So it's a triage.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've tried it. By the way, I was driving on the highway.
Were you in a
990.
crisis?
Did you?
Sure. I called them and told them what I was doing. You know, when
Right.
when the lady answered the phone, and we had a nice conversation, and it was during a time I checked to make sure she wasn't busy, and she's like, "Oh yes, this is fine, this is great," and I told her what I was doing with the show and everything.
Good.
And
Okay.
it was she was on point.
Yeah.
It was an experienced clinician. She was ready to deal with the things that were going on. It was cool.
Question:
It was well
Are those
done.
people? I mean, I don't know. Are they volunteer or do they get paid?
No, it's a system.
It's
Yeah,
a system, like a
system.
paid
Mhm.
position.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can text 911, by the way.
You can text 911. Shut up.
Okay, we're being told by Neil that we can text 911 as well as 988.
Although, I
That's-
mean, I'm pretty sure I would much rather call 911, but I guess if you might be in a situation where you can't call 911.
Swatting because of text.
Huh?
Oh, swatting. Those are that's horrible.
I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
Oh, swatting is the worst thing in the world. If you
What is
have
swatting?
it's done mostly for political opponents, right? I mean, it's done to people, gamers.
Or a lot of
They do it
think-
for
I
fun.
feel like Chris and I are totally lost right
I am.
now.
Okay, basically is that you will send. Let's say there's a domestic violence going on at a
Okay.
politician's place, home,
Okay.
and they don't agree with the politician, and so they'll SWAT them basically, and the SWAT team will come out to
Oh.
take care of
Place
it.
a 911 call saying there's a hostage murder situation.
At this
Misusing the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, misusing the
Well,
system.
I was thinking more if I was being held hostage and I couldn't necessarily call 911, but
Yeah.
I could
Well,
text
there's always
911
abuses and
and
fraud.
say like, "Hey,
There's
send
always
help."
there's always abuses and fraud to the systemic things that we begin to create, but I don't want to get lost for
Yeah.
that because these are also very well used resources for appropriate means, right?
So
And
I
I-
was 988 first,
I'm big picture guy on in terms just like you.
Yes.
long term.
Long term, and that is that we would also do a lot more peer counseling. We would do we would have peer opportunities, do training, for example, in a university or college.
I love it.
Okay, you would actually train and require faculty or staff members to do this because just in case you can't get to a phone or whatever and somebody's suicidal or whatever, you would be able to help and de-escalate.
I'm not able to talk about the project yet, but John, maybe you're thinking about it due to a common awareness that you and I have about a project where somebody is wanting to institute a basic required college level introduction class for mental health. And it's kind of like those types of things, 988, an introductory required class in college on mental health. There's introductory components that are in elementary school.
So it's
that is
mental
valuable.
hygiene.
Mental hygiene is
Right.
the word. Exactly.
At the elementary school I was at, they had SEL time, social emotional learning.
Go with a mental hygiene because that's an older term that is building onto what we're trying to do now.
Okay. Well, the way I'm thinking about it is that you start at a very early age. Let's say in elementary school, if you have feelings or that you would be able to let's say I can reach out to the guidance the school counselor.
School counselor,
learn.
they're
Yes,
no longer
you learn.
guidance
You
counselors.
learn.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you start doing that sort of thing, or you would start having like little groups that would be a part at elementary school that kids could belong to, and that it would be a working on one's. Well, this is. Do I have a happy face today, or do I describe how you feel? And so people would start to be able to know that they could actually talk about their feelings. And if somebody is hurting you or something like that, you could go to a safe person. You do that in churches.
These are
as
good
well.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, right?
Yeah, you do it
Increasing our awareness.
in congregations and and so you would go in and let's say there's some churches that say, well, you know, a man is head of the house and can do anything that he wants with his wife. Well, that would be a sense of education that you might come into a church or a congregation and say, okay, well, maybe that's not exactly what the Bible's saying.
Right.
And
These are all awesome, John. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
in African American congregations, there has been more of a suspicion I think of mental health counselors and psychotherapy
Yeah,
because
that's dissipated though.
Yeah, it is
Hispanic, not so much.
Yeah, and the reason why was because it was used as a way of keeping people from, well, there was a problem in the black community of distrust of organizations, for example, but especially if they were white dominated.
Oh yeah, his partner gonna come take my kids from me.
Yeah,
I think a lot of it also has to do with in the home. So parents teaching their kids how to regulate their emotions, how to deal with, when we have big feelings, what do we do? And a lot of that also means that the adults have to be able to regulate their own emotions.
step
part of the
parenting.
That's part of the challenge.
mean,
yeah.
The Adlerian step.
But I think that's a lot. That is a lot of like what we can do as far as the CPR for. Because a
Mental
lot
health.
of times it starts with the kids. I mean, because those kids are going to grow up and be adults some days, and who knows what kind of world they're going to be living in when the 5-year-olds are now 20. And so I think a lot of times it starts young when they're in the home and they're in an opportunity, or even in places like schools. Like I mentioned earlier, the school I was at had SEL time, which is social emotional learning, and
Awesome.
they would learn about the school I did my school counseling internship at. Did guidance was a special. Just like PE and art and music,
Okay,
they had
right.
guidance once a week, and I taught every single class in that elementary school during my internship. And I think those are great opportunities for kids to learn
That's growth.
about.
Go ahead, John.
social
Finish this
emotional
up.
health. Yes,
Yeah,
John.
sorry. No, I was thinking. No, you didn't say anything.
Okay, thank you.
Is return school counseling back to school counseling and have them stop doing. And I know schools are always using
Counselors for
counselors paperwork
For testing, for
testing,
504s, for
right, and return it
subbing,
back
for-
to what
yeah.
Apply it to what it's
guidance
supposed to be for.
used to be about.
Yeah. To actually, I mean, the name is in school counselors. I know so many school counselors who
Don't do that.
barely have any time to run groups. They barely have any time to see people individually because they're running around like chickens
bleeding.
with their heads cut off. I mean, they're just
Can you
Be-
can you name your old school counselors?
from when I was in school.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chrissy Rape.
Okay.
She's the reason
Okay.
that I am a therapist today.
Oh, well, that's not
So
fair.
That's the only reason.
Jay Calkins, Mrs. Dacos, Mr. Vanderscow. Son, you all my
And
school
Kelly Byrne.
counselors. Yeah.
That was my middle school
But-
counselor.
Well, you know
Shout out
what?
to
That's
those
a
people.
that's a great segue, guys. Let me take us out of here with those names that you're just recalling. And on the YouTube live, we got some praise of appreciation for what it is that we do as a calling and as a profession, and those out there that work with people, not just in the therapy realm, but in policing, working with people, in teachers and working with people. And I don't want to leave any out, but nursing and first responders and certainly therapists that are out there. Like, thank you for what you do, because we are in a tough time and we do need you to step into what it is that you're doing. I am aware of a young DSS worker, a new teacher, some people that are coming into these places where we really need and appreciate the invested passion that you have for what it is that you're doing and working in the helping professions. So for those of you that are in Through a Therapist's Eyes and those of you that listen to Through a Therapist's Eyes, I, for one, also am very grateful for all that we're doing, because I think we need it a lot. And I care and I'm passionate about mental health and substance abuse issues. So thank you for joining up to do the work that we need to do, and as a society, culture, and around the world, that's what we're about here. So we'll continue to endeavor figuring this out together. Guys, great topic. Stay
Yeah.
with it. Stay with us. Stay well, and we'll see you next week.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye.